The mission of the apostles' angels came to an end, and the priests took over the sacred trust of continual reporting, the dispute, the distortion, and the deviation. The heavenly teachings started. Paganism began, and the priests were skillful in setting teachings that were not issued by the apostles. Their imagination and their personal greed went too far, and they fabricated stories and legends. Their influence on people was like magic. They claimed to know the unseen to ensure that they were capable of answering any question after appeasing the gods by making them offers. When the mission of the apostles' angels came to an end, and the priests took over the sacred trust of continual reporting, the dispute, the distortion, and the deviation, the heavenly teachings started. Paganism began, and the priests were skillful in setting teachings that were not issued by the apostles. Their imagination and their personal greed went too far, and they fabricated stories and legends. Their influence on people was like magic. They claimed to know the unseen to ensure that they were capable of answering any question after appeasing the gods by making them offers. A lot of deviation happened to the first teachings of man that were issued by the angels or the gods. Man went after these deviations and became a victim of the legends fabricated by the priests, who made him worship them for their control, power, deep wisdom, or their charm and wonder. The mixing of great truths began in their full religious picture from its upper source with the power of the priests, the narrators of legends. The priests managed with charm, magic, and cleverness to convince the people. Polytheism and paganism began when Egyptian civilization was in its infancy, and it gave the gods or the angels a degenerate image of mankind. The angels or gods laid the foundations of ancient Egyptian religion and all that it included of morals, virtue, and wisdom that was distorted by the priests through their corrupt illusions and personal greed. They sold their religion for their world and distorted the message of God's soldiers on earth. The question now is, where do the angels' apostles stand in relation to the deviation of the priests? The answer is, their mission was confined or devoted to the support of the people and to help them learn. They were not concerned with rectification or correction. That is the divine sunnah, freedom of choice. He who wills, let him believe, and whoever wishes, let him disbelieve. The few centuries that preceded the First Dynasty were the epoch when the priests of Ain Shams were committed to the apostles' instructions, and their influence had not grown yet. Their influence started to grow from the beginning of the Fourth Dynasty. At that time, the rule or the guardianship of the god Horus had ended with the end of the Third Dynasty in the archaic state, 2680-2780 BC. The Fourth Dynasty started with King Senefru, who was followed by King Khufu Cheops under the rule or guardianship of the Khnum Khufu. The god or the apostle Ra appeared with the third king Khafra in the Fourth Dynasty between 2560-2680 BC. The influence of the priests in the era of Senefru or Khufu Cheops was not dangerous, but it had become strong since the era of Khafra. The name of Ra became part of the names of some kings and the princes of the royal family. The fifth name of kings, son of Ra, started to appear in the era of Khafra. The domination of the priests was felt, and they suggested to the kings that they were the sons of the gods, and the king, who is the son of the god, has the power and the prestige of the god. He should be worshipped by the people whom he ruled. That was a priestly fabrication to alienate the people from worshipping the only God to the worshipping of the slaves, thus leading the people to polytheism. The priests fabricated a lot of imaginary stories and priestly lies so as to dominate the minds of the elite as well as the common people. They convinced the kings that happiness in the other world depended on wealth and prestige. The king was buried in a magnificent tomb with a lot of property, and he built luxurious temples so as to be happy in the other world. It was only a justification for their obscene wealth, because they wanted to be happy in the other world, and the bearer of glad tidings had a share in it. The priests told a lot of lies and fabricated stories against the kings, so the kings showered the priests and the temples with gifts, privileges, donations, and endowments. The result was that the priests accumulated wealth and prestige at the expense of the ruler's wealth and prestige. The idea of plotting against the ruler through fabricated stories and lies and seizing power and usurping the throne appealed to them. The priests of the sun made up a long story, written in the Middle Kingdom and found on a papyrus. They attributed its events to the era of King Khufu Cheops. To give it more importance, they included in the story some names of previous kings whom the Egyptians respected and loved, such as Cheops, Senefru, and Djoser. The king summoned his children one day and asked each one to tell a story about magicians and what miracles they could do. The first son told a story about King Djoser, and the second told a story about King Enbuga, and the third narrated a story about King Senefru. Those stories were only an introduction to what would come later. One of the sons of King Cheops tells him that there is a great magician who lives in his kingdom, and he can do miracles. So that magician appears before King Cheops, and he starts doing some of his miracles in the presence of the king. One of those miracles showed the restoration of life to animals after slaughtering them and separating their heads from their bodies. Khufu Cheops asked the magician to do something, but he could not do that work, and he added, "This work could be done by the eldest of 3 sons in the womb of a priest's wife who became pregnant by the god Ra himself. The god told her that they would ascend the country's throne, and the eldest of them would be the high priest in the city of Ion, namely the city of Heliopolis. The king grew worried, but the magician assured him that that would not happen during his reign, and his son would succeed him on the throne. Then his grandson would become the country's ruler, and then another grandson." The story went on, making reference to the pregnancy of the priest's wife, and the subsequent emergence of wonders and miracles, and how the goddesses of midwifery attended the child's birth. The goal which the author of the story had is clear. The takeover of the throne by the priests of the sun was something destined long before, and those who sat on the throne were much better than their predecessors because they are the sons of the god Ra and of his own spine. That inspired Queen Hatshepsut to draw on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahari, in the modern state, the story of the visit of the god Amun-Ra to her mother in her bedroom, he making her pregnant and she giving birth. We also see in the Temple of Luxor the story of Amenhotep III, which is similar to Hatshepsut's story. The marriage of the gods or the angels' apostles is mentioned in the Torah. These creatures have special characteristics of angels and human beings. Refer the absolute truth. It is certain that the story of King Cheops and the magician is a fabricated one and a well-knit plan by the priests to seize the throne and rule Egypt. Just take a look at the Palermo stone to see how the priest influenced King Navar-Areka-Ra in the period 2529-2527 BC. They exploited the weakness of the king and his love for the gods so that he granted the endowments to the gods.